welcome or welcome back. My name is Brittany and it is time for a reading wrap up. It has been a minute since I've done one. I need to update you on the last few things I read in December, what I did in January. I read my first arc and then I entered a big fat reading slump. So we're gonna chat all the things and all the books I have read. Going back to December, I finished Baby X, and this is by Kiera Peikoff. I did the audiobook for this, and this does have 3 female audiobook narrators to match our 3 female protagonists. I've kind of talked about this book a little bit. I'll probably geek out again for a second if you don't mind, but this is taking place in the future, and we don't make babies the same way anymore. We don't have sex. We do everything in a lab with genetics. So there's a few ways to do that. If you want to use your own eggs and sperm, that's great. They basically go through a similar process where the embryos are tested, not only for genetic abnormalities, but also like traits like empathy, athleticism, humor, friendliness, and then you pick the best embryo during selection week. The technology has also advanced to the point where, let's say like, I don't know, maybe I don't have eggs or something. They can use my hair, my saliva, blood, like any other kind of DNA. They can actually use that and turn that into eggs or sperm. It doesn't matter your gender. They can take any DNA and turn it into eggs and sperms to be used for embryos. This technology has then been weaponized by a company called The Vault on the dark web, and there are people out there who, if you're famous and you're not careful, they will try to steal your DNA. And then this DNA is sold on the black market. In theory, I could go on there, buy a famous person's DNA, get impregnated, and then I would be with child from this famous celebrity, even though we've never met, never had sex, but I could have their children. Like, it's so wild. Like, the science in this book was so fun and so fascinating because it opens up all the ethics with having children and genetics and DNA and then choosing your child. Like, there just was so much to it. So that's kind of the world we're in. It's very sci-fi, very techy, but still feels, I guess, natural, like a natural progression for things without feeling too futuristic. So this is just kind of the setting. I just thought the science was so fascinating. Where this really kicks off is with our 3 female protagonists. One of them is pregnant. The other one works for, or essentially has started her own company to work for famous people in order to safeguard their DNA. So if they are out at a restaurant, she will clean up the utensils and the cups and any napkins he used and throw it all away. She has her client that she's with, so that's the second protagonist. And then we also follow a third woman, and she really wants to be a journalist. She's trying to get like a breakout article. And the other interesting thing about this world is there is no, like, people say that once you hit 35, you have entered a geriatric pregnancy. There's no limit on when you can get pregnant in this world. Her mom is going through the selection process at 60. Life expectancy has changed, and so has child rearing age. Like, while it's kind of weird for our main character, like, it's not unusual for her mom to be having a child at 60. Like, the genetics and everything is just so wild. So all of these female characters do ultimately come together. Their stories intertwine in a really satisfying way. It pulls in all this really cool science, and like, it just was so fun. It was so fun. I just had like the best time like geeking out over this and listening to this audiobook. I thought all 3 narrators did a really good job with their performance for these characters, and I don't know. I think if you're looking for a fun sci-fi that like really gets into science fiction versus like aliens and space battle science, I think you would really enjoy this. The next book I read, actually the next 2 books, I'll kind of relate to both of them because they explored similar themes, and one was a hit for me and one was a big miss. So starting with I Who Have Never Known Men, this is by Jacqueline Hartman. This book is about 40 women who are trapped in a bunker underground. They basically are like in the center of this prison room. There's like bars all around them. They're fed irregularly, like they have to use a toilet in the middle of the room. They can't touch each other, like they can talk, but everything's like pretty monitored. There's guards patrolling the area day in, day out. Our main character who we're following is in this same situation. She's part of the 40 women, but she was a child when she entered this bunker, whereas the rest of the 39 women have some recollection of their previous life. Like they knew about jobs and cars, like they have children, but like it's all just these vague memories of like life before the bunker. Their just experience in here is different. So our main character has never known men, like men, the outside world, even though there's men guarding her. But anyways, She's never known men in like the grand sense of freedom and being out in the world. So she ends up becoming pretty vital to their escape and ultimate survival. This book was interesting. So I unfortunately think this was a case of the hype being too real for me. My expectations were just way too high. And then I also just think I went in with the wrong understanding of what this book was about. So anytime this was pitched to me, anytime I saw reviews about it, people were sobbing, it was life-changing, like they had this huge visceral reaction to this story. I finished this book and was like, okay, like next. And that's a really big bummer of a feeling because I didn't get it. And I've like sat here, I've been thinking about this since I read this in December, and I still can't put my finger on it. The only thing I've really come up with is that I mentioned going in with the wrong expectations. So when this book was pitched, it was basically just like 40 women are trapped in a bunker underground, and that's all you need to know. And I think that kind of did me a disservice because really this book, while it's about these women in the bunker, it's very philosophical, it's very introspective, it's not fast-paced at all in my opinion, and it's not something where you should expect to get answers. Which like is fine, but I was expecting a totally different story. I think the other factor for my lack of enjoyment was that all I saw was a 2022 publication date, which if I'm reading a book that I think is from the 2020s, I'm expecting a different story. This book was actually originally published in 95, and so reading a book from 1995 is a lot different than reading a book from 2020 as far as like what I think the story is going to bring, especially with this thing of women being trapped in a bunker and like what's going on. So I think that also affected my experience because I wanted more. And not that I can't get behind like unsatisfying endings or characters that I don't really like. It just wasn't the story I was expecting at all. This book explores themes of female friendship, isolation, knowledge, whether knowledge is power, and with the older women who have been in the bunker, and you get to see how that lack of knowledge of before or just anything in general really affects our main character. Just human resiliency, isolation, the idea of being the last person on Earth, and like how would that feel, that type of despair. So there were a lot of decent things explored. It just didn't hit, and I'm like, it's a bummer because like I want to be on the hype train, but something just didn't work for me. Other than the things I've mentioned, the only other thing I can think of is maybe the audiobook experience wasn't the right choice. The narrator has a beautiful voice. She did a fine job, and typically I can have a very profound listening experience with audiobooks, but this was just a total miss. And so I'm wondering if it would be worth a reread physically so I can just like sit and marinate with the words and like take my time. I don't know, that's like the only other thing I can think of for why this didn't really work for me. I think I could still find the right person to recommend it to, and if it sounds interesting, definitely pick it up, but just know there's a lot more thinking to it. Like, you're not going to get this grand crazy story. It's pretty bleak, it's pretty like depressing, but not in a way that I felt connected to. But I know a lot of people really resonate with the darkness of this book, so it was a miss for me, but give it a go if it sounds good. The next one I want to chat about, and this is where the two that are going to kind of relate, is Afterworld by Debbie Urbinski. This book was so fun. And when I tell you what it's about, it probably won't sound like it's a fun time, but this book was so fun, and honestly, I haven't read something like this in quite a while. So, I'm trying to think of how to like tell you this book. First off, I think the most important thing to know is that I think you should read this physically because there are so many nuggets within the writing, the font, the structure. It is giving House of Leaves, which if you know what that book is, it's basically like a puzzle where everything on the page is intentional, and I don't think you would get the same experience if you listened to it. You have to see those things as you're going along, or I think you would miss it. This book is taking place in the future, where we have asked AI, artificial intelligence, to help us save the world. So they've decided to release a virus that will kill everybody, and then their solution is we can upload our consciousness to Maya, or the afterworld, and live in this consciousness space without our bodies off of Earth. So Earth itself can replenish and grow and be revived. Like, we're not damaging the earth anymore. The way this story is told, though, is through one of the AIs, and they are archiving the last human experience on Earth. Everyone has died, and they are watching surveillance cameras, journal entries. They're pulling in textbooks and references to catalog our character Sen Anon's life and what she goes through as the last human on Earth. So the themes with this and I Who Have Never Known Men, like, you get to see, like, the despair and the destruction of the world, and, like, she really does go through it, being the last person on Earth, being alone and isolated, and it just did it in such a better way than I Who Have Never Known Men, and more interesting. Like, there were so many things in here that made this engaging and interesting and fun to go along with, because you're going along with the story, but you're also trying to figure things out too. And with all the structural elements, with how it's written, it just adds an extra layer to the story. I really enjoyed this. I just want to thank my friend who shared this book with me, and, like, we nerded out about it, and it was a great time. So this is actually my copy. I need to give yours back. I want to share Debbie Urbinski. She reviewed her own book on Goodreads, and I think it's really funny. Like, this is just the energy I think is hilarious. So she gave her own book 5 stars. I'm really tempted to review some of the readers who reviewed my novel here. I'm noticing when readers have an inability to connect with a book, not just with my novel, but I've seen it elsewhere as well, they assume that the book is the problem. Could it perhaps be the reader who is at fault? Or, putting blame aside, could it simply be a reader-book mismatch? That the reader is fine, the book is fine, but this is not the book the reader was meant to read at this time or maybe ever. Listen, if you only like traditionally genre books, have never read anything remotely experimental, and have no interest in trying, think the future is totally fine, so you only want to read books that pretend the future is totally going to be fine, or loved Station 11 and hated House of Leaves, you aren't going to like this book. Don't even bother trying to read it, please. It's so funny. And she said she took 8 years to write this. Like, you can just tell that everything on every single page was purposeful. And I just think her roasting the readers was funny. But going back to I Who Have Never Known Men, I'm, like, racking my brain trying to figure out why it didn't work for me. It simply could have just been a book-reader mismatch. Like, it might not even be that serious. So, I don't know. I just thought that was really funny. I would agree with the House of Leaves comparison as far as structure. I think it's just going to give you a better experience. And it's funny she mentioned Station 11, because Station 11 is referenced in this book, and I did not like Station 11. And I haven't read House of Leaves, but I think I will. So I'm just excited that I found this. I don't know. It just was an interesting, like, experience in my reading. And if you are up for the challenge, if you're up for something, I highly recommend Afterworld by Debbie Urbinski. So because Afterworld mentioned Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, I did pick this up, and it was fine. I actually didn't like it. I don't know why I said it was fine. I didn't really like it at all. I think, again, I had the wrong expectations for what this book is. This book takes place in a post-pandemic world. We get a little bit pre-pandemic, like how that starts up, but we spend most of our time in post-pandemic era. And it's like a current pandemic. So when we're in the kind of post-pandemic era, they have gutted out like trucks, taken out the engine, all the heavy stuff, and now they have like truck-drawn carriages. So like the horses are drawing the trucks versus like having carriages like in the old days, because like we don't use carriages now. So some of that was funny. This book opens up with a theater play, and the main character, one of our main characters, Arthur Leander, collapses on stage from a heart attack and dies. We have Javon, who is a paramedic, and he tries to resuscitate Arthur. Is unsuccessful, and then we get to follow his story. And then one of the other characters we follow is Kristen, and she was a little girl in this performance watching Arthur pass away, meeting this guy Jeevan, and then like being influenced by this loss that's very tragic for a child to witness. But then also like this rolls right into the pandemic. Like within the next few days, like a lot of people are dead. That's really just what sets this off. The book says that it looks at art and theater as a way to preserve humanity, and it kind of does, but not in the way I was expecting. So when we are in the post-pandemic era, we follow Kristen as she's older. She's like mid-20s, maybe 30, and she is part of a traveling symphony. I think I think they just call themselves a traveling symphony, traveling orchestra, and they do like Shakespeare retellings, music, like they just perform to all these different communities. I honestly don't remember what Jeevan's up to. I don't remember his story at all. I'm sorry. And then we also get a lot of flashbacks back to Arthur's life. We meet his multiple wives, his children, and then they still come into play like years later during the pandemic. And when I was picturing like a post-pandemic world focusing on art and theater, I thought that was going to be the main focus, but Arthur really like took up a lot of page time, and I didn't find him that engaging of a character. Like, I didn't want to follow him. I wanted to be traveling and seeing the plays and behind the stage and meeting these small communities, but that just wasn't the focus. So that was kind of a bummer for me. We do run into trouble with a crazed religious figure. As one would expect, after like the end of the world, you have to have a new religion. And they also are searching for a rumored safe haven at an airport. So there were things I liked, but overall, like, I finished the story pretty unsatisfied. I think for like the scenes that describe like how a pandemic feels and that loss of normalcy, I did feel like that was pretty accurate, especially given 2020. But overall, like, I didn't really love the writing. I found most of it odd, other than a few really nice sentences. I didn't really care for any of the characters, and just the focus was way different than I was expecting, and I just couldn't get behind it. For people who enjoy theater stories and spending time with actors and actresses in the theater, and not like super famous people, I'm talking about like small town theaters and like that type of theater drama, I really enjoyed City of Girls, the Whalebone Theater, and parts of Tom Lake. Just the theater scenes of Tom Lake, not the rest of the stuff. So like that was what I was hoping for, because I've read theater inspired or based stories, and like this just wasn't it. And again, I think it was my expectations way too high and just way too different for the story we got. This next book that I finished, this one I can't believe I read. It was so disgusting. I finished Tampa by Alyssa Nutting, and this comes with like huge disclaimers, huge warnings, like read at your own risk. This is all about sexual assault of a minor, and we are following the perpetrator, the pedophile. Like, we are in that perspective, and it is as dirty and vile and disgusting as you can imagine. Like, this is not going to be for everyone. I totally get it. I had seen this recommended and on a few like best of 2024 lists, and I was curious enough. I knew exactly what I was getting into, and it was very hard to read at times. Like, I would pick it up, put it down. Like, it was one of those books you had to take breaks in. It's meant to be disturbing. Like, that is the point. But it was also really well written. There's some sentences I saved and highlighted in the Kindle where I just was like, wow, like that was fucked up and really well said. I don't know. I feel like we don't always follow disgusting, depraved women as our main perspectives. Like, this woman is awful. Like, she's terrible. Like, no one should be assaulting minors. And like, I just don't feel like we get that perspective all the time. It also just brings in an interesting thought of like, would this have been different if it was a man and a female student? Or like, the big theme in this book is, was it rape because she's hot? Like, that is explored, and it's so wild. So kind of some of the things I said, we have a young high school teacher. She's in her early 20s, and she is like, through the book, blatantly clear she's attracted to prepubescent boys. And she can't wait for the school year to start. She can't wait to find her new boy. Like, it's so gross. It's so icky. And like, the things she does, like, and the things she thinks about in order to like, who's she gonna pick? Like, you just see this like conniving manipulator like at work to find the perfect boy who's not gonna say anything. And then you also get to see this young man struggling because like, this is his first sexual experience. So like, to an extent, it's enjoyable without him realizing the severity of what's actually happening. And like, it's so wild. Like, it's a fairly short read. I think it's like maybe 150, 160 pages. So like, thank God you don't have to read all of that for too long. But if you, hi Della, if you are interested in a story like that and aware of the content, I think you would enjoy it. If that's not for you, that's totally fine. Like, it is a very challenging read, but it just brought up a bunch of interesting things about the situation. And this was actually inspired by a early 2000s case in Florida. Same situation, high school teacher, high school boy. Like, disgusting. This one quote I feel like is just so well written and just highlights how disgusting our main female character is. Like, it's wild that her brain is like this. And I also have to give props to Alyssa Nutting, because she wrote the damn thing. Like, she did it, she wrote it, she went there. And like, I can't even imagine writing something like this, but I think it is important to look at in that, like, this is wrong, this shouldn't happen, but there's also a lot of sexism within the realm of abuse, because we typically don't think of women as perpetrators, especially when they're attractive. Like, just all of those things were so wild to explore. So this quote is nuts. It's fucking nuts. Sensing that I was drifting even further away from him, Ford's mind went into overdrive. He'd recently tried to get the baby conversation going again. He wanted us to go to a fertility doctor, getting the ball rolling. If we ever have a child, it'll be through adoption, I stressed, trying to play to both his vanity and my own. You didn't marry me for my stretch marks. I had no interest in children. Even if Ford raised the thing completely by himself, and we trained it to not talk to me or interact with me whatsoever, I would surely end up moving out of our home within days of its arrival. There was an impulse of self-protection surrounding this decision as well. I knew if I ever had a son, at a certain age it would be impossible to ignore him, and I never wanted to force that transgression on myself. Oh, are you kidding me? Like, like, that's so fucked up. Are you kidding? Like, it was wild. It was such an experience. Again, not for everyone, but if you can handle all of that and are curious, highly recommend Cautiously Tampa by Alyssa Nutting. So after I finished that book, I did enter a big fat reading slump. Not because of that book. I don't know, I wasn't feeling good. I was reading a bunch of stuff, and then it just like, I don't know, I just stopped reading. So I didn't pick up anything else for January. I only got through 3 books in January. So I didn't read it all. I did end up getting my very first ARC from NetGalley, which is pretty cool. Anyone can go to NetGalley, create an account, and you can request ARCs or advanced reader copies of books that have yet to have been released. They just ask that you publish a review on their website and then link any other reviews. This YouTube video will be linked for the review of the book I read, so they know I actually read the book I said I was going to. And other than getting the book early, there's no other perk or incentive. I'm not getting paid. It just was I gotta read the book early, which is exciting. This kind of started getting me out of my reading slump because I wanted to read the book. I wanted to read it, submit a review, that way I can continue to get more ARCs. And the book I finished was The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling, and this comes out in May, so not too much longer to wait. This book was really fun. I definitely enjoyed this. This is a medieval horror, and I love that setting. I think it's great. I also thought this was interesting just with how the book starts, because we are dropped, literally dropped in the middle of a siege that has been going on for 6 months. We are at AMR Castle, and they are maybe only have 2 weeks left of rations. Everyone is starving. Everyone is sick and ill. They just got water again, but they're out of food. They have chunks of dried meat, and that's supposed to last the rest of the siege. And there's no help anywhere in sight. We have 3 female characters we are following. Focine, she is a nun, and she was the one who purified the water, and she is now being tasked with food. Getting food literally anywhere, out of nowhere. They can't leave the castle. It's very hot where they're at. They can't grow any food inside the castle either. She's okay, I guess I'll just make food out of thin air. Okay. And then we are following Sir Voyne, who is a knight to the king, and he wants Sir Voyne to make sure Focine is actually doing her job. So Sir Knight is now overseeing Focine's attempt at food. Our third character is Trelia, and she has some secrets. We don't really know what she's about, but she is very observant and inquisitive. And our first introduction to her is she's got eyes on Sir Voyne. There's very obviously some kind of history, but she's catching rats. She's working as a seamstress, but is also just more aware of the castle than you think. And it's interesting because you have Sir Voyn and Focine up here, like with the king, and then we get Trelia, like kind of in like the dungeons, like the depths of the castle. So you just see like how these two classes are moving about and interacting with each other. One day, the Constant Lady, which is their religious figure, shows up inside the castle wall with 4 of her saints. And everyone is like awestruck at their beauty and like their magnificence, and they are promised food and salvation. Our 3 main characters have to work together because this might not be the promised salvation they were hoping for. So this book was fun. Like, being dropped in the middle of a siege, like, you instantly just feel how dire the circumstances are. If something doesn't change soon, everyone's going to die. Like, and you feel that despair immediately. I also liked the horror elements to this. Is pretty graphic and bloody, and also like realistic, because there is a part where the king's like, well, I mean, we can just start eating the dead, like we have to eat somehow. And so cannibalism is definitely in this book, and I loved every second of it. I also just loved the Constant Lady and what she's up to and just how everything shakes out. So if you're looking for a medieval horror, I definitely recommend The Starving Saints. This also does have some LGBTQ rep in here. Not a lot of time for romance because, you know, you're trying to not die, but definitely some complicated relationships. After that, I was like, okay, we finished a book, like the first book in like 6 weeks. Like, let's go. I wanted some quick, easy wins, and I went back to some good old fantasy romance. I was looking for things that were entertaining, that were going to be quick to read, easy to read. Like, I just wasn't really in the mood for something deep or thought-provoking or complicated. Like, I just wanted easy, fun books. So I would stop scrolling on my phone. So I picked up the Crimson Moth duology by Kristen Ciccarelli. This second book just came out, so it is completed now. It starts with Heartless, Hunter, and Rebel Witch. In this world, it was initially ruled by 3 witch queens. A new form of government came in, the New Republic, killed all the queens, and started slaughtering the witches. Like, they wanted to eradicate every witch and witch sympathizer. They have their, military body called the Blood Guard, and that is who is tasked with finding witches and sympathizers and killing them. Fast forward a few years, the Republic is thriving, witches are being caught, and they're still trying to catch them, but like witches just aren't out in the open anymore because they're fighting for their lives and hiding. And this is where we meet our main character, Rune Winters. Rune is hiding in plain sight as the Republic's #1 like dumb blonde socialite, but she's hiding the fact she's a witch, and she's also like a witch vigilante. She is the Crimson Moth and is trying to save as many witches as she can, and uses her like influence, her power, her money to just throw people off her trail, because the persona she presents is very dumb and vapid and materialistic, and they would never expect her to be so smart and conniving. Our other main character, this is a dual perspective fantasy romance. Our main male character is Gideon Sharp, and he is the captain of the Blood Guard, the same group trying to hunt down witches. So you can only imagine how things go when their paths inevitably cross. This is a pretty solid enemies to lovers. Like, they have like valid reasons to hate each other. There's lots of scheming and betrayal and trust issues. The back and forth felt pretty realistic because there are high stakes for both of them. If Gideon, as captain of the Blood Guard, doesn't turn her in and she's later found out, then he would also die from being accused of being a witch sympathizer. But like, if he likes Rune, like, he doesn't want to turn her in either, because then she would die. Like, there's like guaranteed death for both of them, kind of no matter what happens. It definitely adds to the tension and the stakes of this enemies to lovers relationship. I thought the magic of the witches was really fun. I thought the world we were in was very fun as well, even though it's like mostly at war. I did enjoy it. The friendships I thought were great, and just like the overall like arc of the story was pretty decent as well. Book 1 ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger. Tensions are definitely high, and then we continue into the second book with war and ultimate resolution. So if you want to figure out what happens to our witch and witch hunter, definitely check out the Crimson Moth duology. If you care about a spice level, I would say it's pretty mild. I think there were only 2 sex scenes throughout the entire duology, and they were like a few pages, not that graphic at all. So if you're looking for something maybe like 1 to 2 chili peppers, depending on, like, I would say it's maybe a 1. Like, it really wasn't that intense at all, in my opinion. But if you're looking for maybe like limited spice, this would be a easy, quick, fun pickup for you. To keep my like quick wins going, I picked up Quicksilver by Callie Hart. And I'm gonna first admit, I was judging this book by the cover hard. I was like, what is this? And also, I was being extra judgy because I have a lot of trust issues with book talk recommendations, especially when something's overhyped. Like, that's kind of been the theme of this video, is like overhyped books. So I watch BookTube myself, and a few people I enjoy watching did like it, and I was like, we're just trying to have fun. Like, it's not that serious. If I don't like it, I'll stop reading and pick something else up. And I gave myself the sample. And ultimately, while this book is pretty basic, I did enjoy it more than I thought it would. We've seen the setup of this book before. Human girl enters Fae realm, finds a grumpy shadow daddy who's like 2 centuries old, and then they like fall in love. Like, I mean, we've seen this before, but there were quite a few things it did differently that kept it engaging and fun. So the human world where our main character starts is a desert with 2 suns, and it's very, very harsh. It's almost like a wheel with like spokes sticking out. And so the queen is at the center, and then the like sections have like these huge giant walls, and different groups of people are segregated. Our main character is from a place called the Third, and they get like 6 ounces of water a day, like no food, minimal rations of anything. They're treated poorly, and they're also just looked upon very poorly as well. Our main character leaves her district and is trying to find metal, which is a very precious resource in this world, and ends up stealing like a gauntlet, like a glove from the Queen's Guard. And this gets her into a bunch of trouble, huge amount of trouble. And when she goes to visit the queen to find out her punishment, this is where she enters a Fae realm. When we enter the Fae realm, I thought it was very fun. It has a lot of those like grand, opulent settings I think a lot of fantasy readers enjoy. We have like some similar character archetypes, but again, they just felt fun. I liked this setting we were in. We do spend some time at a war camp. Like, the Fae realm has its own problems too, and so we get to learn about those. I also really liked the magic system for the Fae realm. It's metal based, which is pretty fun, hence Quicksilver that comes into play. And then just like the ending and other elements that were added in, there are vampires in this world and other creatures, but it felt natural. I feel like sometimes fantasy romance tries to add as many popular things as possible to like get people to read their book. Like, oh, hurry, we know this, all these things are popular, like add them all in. And like sometimes that just gets a little ridiculous. But the addition to the vampires, like, it made sense. It related to the Fae lore, and it was a little bit different than like Dracula vampires. And I just thought all of that was really unique. The ending was pretty wild. It was pretty crazy. Like, just some twists I wasn't really expecting. Definitely made it an engaging read. And overall, like, I had a good time with this, which shocked me. I was surprised, pleasantly surprised. We should be getting the conclusion to this book in the fall, I think. And I'm not going to remember any of this later this year. So I think if I decide to pick up the second book, I'll actually re-listen to the first book and then maybe do the audiobook for the second if they keep the same cast members. I was hearing like snippets of the audiobook on TikTok, and the voices sound really fun. That is it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me while I recapped all of my recent reads. I'm hoping that the slump is over. I'm hoping, like, I want to get back to some books, and I have all these beautiful shelves of things I need to read. Do you have like a go-to recommendation for getting out of a reading slump? Drop it in the comments below. I hope you are reading the best books, and I will see you in the next one.